The night air in the Black Hills still smelled like burnt oil and melted steel. Floodlights washed over the skeletal remains of a custom Harley shop, its walls collapsed, its lifts twisted into blackened bones. Fire investigators stood in silence for a moment, then walked away shaking their heads. Among the bikers watching from a distance, a whisper moved faster than the smoke. This was the third shop to burn after touching the same motorcycle. The rumor had already spread across state lines. 55 veteran mechanics had refused to work on one Hells Angels Harley, not because they lacked skill, not because the job was too complex, but because every man who touched it either quit the trade, disappeared overnight, or lost everything he owned. Some swore the engine carried a curse. Others believed the real danger was the club behind it. The tension sharpened when the truth surfaced. The bike was worth more than $1 million, and it belonged to a Hells Angels president known for never forgiving failure. Then, just as fear reached its peak, a 20-year-old rookie mechanic with no reputation and nothing to lose stepped forward and said yes, walking straight into a clubhouse where men vanished for far less. Raven Cross was 20, small in stature, but fierce in presence, carrying herself with the quiet discipline of someone who had grown up learning precision, patience, and honor from her father, a Marine Master Sergeant long gone. She had tools strapped to her belt that once belonged to him, worn and weighted with memory. Entering outlaw spaces without bravado, Raven drew attention not with words, but with the unshakable aura of someone who refused to flinch. She was an outsider, yet she carried a code so visible it demanded acknowledgement. Every motion she made was calculated, every glance deliberate, and yet beneath it all was the stubborn courage that had gotten her here tonight. She had nothing to prove, and that made her dangerous in a way the hardened bikers around her could sense immediately. Caleb Grave, Mercer, president of the Iron Serpent's charter of the Hells Angels, was all muscle, scars, and silence. Every inch of him spoke of battles fought and losses endured. He had lost his only son Eli in a high-speed crash along the mountain roads, and since then his grief had hardened into a quiet, searing authority. Graves' memorial, Harley, was more than a bike. It was a shrine, a weapon, a test. He radiated danger and control, and even as he watched Raven step forward, there was a flicker of something new: curiosity, and perhaps the faintest shadow of hope that someone might rise to meet what he could not. Eli Mercer's absence was everywhere in the compound. The boy had died at 19, too fast, too reckless, and his ashes were hidden inside the very engine that no one dared touch. Raven would not know the full weight of that until she opened it herself. But the memory of loss hung in every tool, every steel beam, every scarred wall. Knuckles, a senior enforcer, moved like a shadow around Raven, silent, observant, protective. His eyes never left her, judging, testing, and waiting to see if she would crack under the first pressure. Ash Doyle, the club's vice president, struggled visibly between loyalty to Grave and doubt about this newcomer. Some nights Ash would watch Raven in the garage and shake his head in disbelief. She either had guts beyond reckoning, or she was courting death. Even Raven's own family haunted her in memory and need. Mason Cross, her father, long dead, whispered through her muscle memory and training, reminding her how to keep calm, how to hold tools steady, how to measure courage against recklessness. Lena Cross, her mother, worked double shifts as a nurse, her worry threading through every call and every paycheck. Noah, her younger brother, suffered from a spinal illness, leaving Raven with both the drive to succeed and a gnawing pressure to return home with proof she could handle the impossible. The real antagonistic forces were layered. The bike itself seemed alive, its cursed engine whispering warnings to those who dared touch it. The club's pride, tradition, and reputation created invisible barriers. And lurking within the circle of 55 mechanics who had walked away was a hidden saboteur, someone who did not want Raven or anyone to succeed. The danger was mechanical, emotional, and deadly human all at once. The setting reinforced every tension and lesson. The Iron Serpent's compound in South Dakota was all concrete, steel, and oil. Memorial walls bore the names of fallen riders, while American flags snapped sharply in the wind. The air smelled of gasoline and sweat, of wood smoke from old fires, and the lingering tang of loss. Every corner held the ghosts of men who had died testing their luck, Every shadow hinted at loyalty and vengeance in equal measure. Brotherhood here was not a slogan. It was carved into steel, tested in blood, and enforced without words. Raven stepped into this world, an outsider, but the compound itself seemed to acknowledge her presence, measuring her against the unspoken rules of men who had nothing left to lose. Raven's phone buzzed with a single, cryptic message. One job. One bike. Just inspect it. Sturgis. Payment guaranteed. The note carried no name, no number to call back, only coordinates and an unspoken warning. Curiosity tangled with instinct. She knew this was more than a simple repair. Something about the phrasing, the certainty, and the hush around it made her pulse tighten. Raven had been offered big jobs before, but none came with this kind of hush, this kind of dread. By the time she reached Sturgis, the night had thickened into a low, almost suffocating fog. Engines idled in the distance, neon from the town cutting through smoke and mist. The Iron Serpent's compound loomed ahead, concrete walls and steel gates marked with faded logos of fallen chapters. Raven had heard the rumors. 55 mechanics had refused this same job. Some walked away quietly, others never spoke again. Everyone said the bike was cursed, but no one ever explained why. Graves stepped from the shadows, all scars and authority. "It's not a bike anyone touches lightly," he said, voice low, measured. His eyes lingered on Raven, weighing her resolve. "This Harley, it was built to lead our annual memorial ride. Every fallen brother rides with it, in spirit. It hasn't run in months. Every attempt to fix it has ended in disaster." She nodded silently, sliding gloves over her hands, heart thudding against her ribs. Armed bikers leaned against steel beams, watching her as if her every move might trigger some hidden punishment. She opened the garage bay and approached the Harley. Its paint was immaculate, the chrome gleaming under harsh lights, but the engine smelled raw oil thick with residue, metallic tang undercut by something faintly coppery. Raven crouched, running fingers over the engine casing, loosening panels. She noticed irregularities, tiny scratches that made no sense, components that seemed deliberately misaligned. Her hands moved with practiced precision, and every eye in the room tracked her movements. Then she opened the engine fully. Inside were 12 small titanium capsules, each engraved with a name. Raven's stomach twisted. Ashes. Human ashes. She recognized instantly what it meant. The memorial itself was sabotaging the machine from the inside, grinding it slowly into failure. This was not a curse of fate. It was grief, grief made physical and impossible to ignore. Raven drew a slow breath, letting the revelation sink in. To walk away now would be betrayal. To continue meant touching the ashes of men who had given everything, confronting a club that measured respect in endurance and courage. The mechanics who had refused were already gone, but she stood in their place, the only one willing to face both the machine and the emotions it carried. In that moment, Raven's choice crystallized. Every beat of fear, every shadowed glance from the bikers, every ounce of uncertainty melted into a single certainty: she could not turn back. Not now. Not ever. She held the truth that could either save the Iron Serpents or fracture the Brotherhood permanently, and she was ready to face it. Raven worked quietly, each movement precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. She spoke only when necessary, explaining what she saw with brutal honesty. "These ashes," she said, voice steady despite the tension pressing in, "are acting like tiny abrasives inside the engine. Every rotation grinds against metal, eating away the heart of this machine. If they aren't removed carefully, the engine will destroy itself." Graves' expression twisted, a mixture of fury, denial, and shame. He had built this Harley with rage, grief, and memory fused into every weld. To hear a 20-year-old rookie dismantle the sanctity of his creation was unbearable. "You don't know what you're touching," he spat, his voice low but trembling with emotion. Around the room, the club divided. Some men muttered that she was disrespectful, that she desecrated what was sacred. Others, however, watched with quiet admiration, recognizing her courage in standing where 55 veterans had walked away. The following evening, Raven sat alone in the club's chapel-like meeting room. Shadows from the memorial walls stretched across her face. She waited, unsure if she would leave alive. The air was heavy with expectation, grief, and the unspoken question, who among them would accept her presence and who would let her fail? Grave returned, silent as a storm. He laid down conditions. Raven could remove the capsules, but only if she personally handled each one with respect, rebuilt the engine entirely by herself, and then led the memorial ride. Failure would not just be mechanical, it would be emotional, a betrayal of every man who had died, and a test of her own code of honor. Danger escalated quickly. Tools vanished mysteriously, critical parts were subtly tampered with, and at least one fellow mechanic whispered a warning: someone doesn't want this fixed. Raven felt the tension in the air sharpen with each passing hour. She began to notice subtle glances, half-hidden smirks, and the quiet movement of men who did not want the truth to come to light. Through it all, Knuckles stayed close, a silent guardian. His presence was a shield she did not ask for, but came to depend on. He never spoke unless necessary, yet every movement signaled that he would intervene without hesitation. A bond formed through shared danger and silent understanding, each of them aware that trust was earned in the smallest gestures and most perilous moments. As the night stretched on, Raven committed fully. Each capsule she lifted, each engine part she examined, each adjustment she made was done with the weight of consequence pressing down. She understood that failure here would bring more than lost wages or reputation. It would fracture a brotherhood, dishonor the dead, and expose the living to a cycle of grief that had already destroyed too many men. With every measured motion, every calculated turn of a wrench, momentum built. The story within the garage was no longer just about a machine. It was about courage, accountability, and confronting the ghosts that lived both in the engine and in the hearts of every biker around her. Raven had stepped into a world that tested more than skill. It tested soul, and with each passing moment, she proved she was willing to see it through, no matter the cost. Raven worked through the night, her hands blackened with oil, sweat tracing the line of her spine. That's when she noticed it, the signs of deliberate sabotage. Oil passages had been altered, bearings scratched, fasteners swapped for slightly mismatched sizes. This wasn't negligence. Someone had wanted the engine to fail. Every failure of the past 55 mechanics suddenly made sense. The realization pressed on her chest, heavy and suffocating. Someone inside, or connected to the club, didn't want this Harley to ride again. The clock ticked louder with every passing hour. The annual memorial ride loomed only days away. Replacement parts were impossible to get in time. The bike was unique, built with custom materials and secret techniques. Raven stared at the engine, exhaustion clawing at her muscles, fear pressing on her mind. She nearly dropped her tools, nearly walked away. The weight of expectation, of grief, and of potential disaster made her hands shake. It was Grave who broke the silence. He approached her in the dimly lit garage, shadowed and raw with emotion. "You think I built this for remembrance?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "I built it in rage. Rage at the mountain. Rage at losing Eli. I didn't want to honor him. I wanted to hold on to him." His voice cracked as he touched the chrome, the memory of his son evident in every scar and weld. Raven understood then that this bike was never just a machine. It was grief made physical, and healing it meant confronting that grief. Raven drew deep from her father's lessons, remembering Mason Cross's words about patience, precision, and endurance. She reminded herself that fear wasn't failure, it was guidance. Slowly, methodically, she started to rebuild the engine, piece by piece, every motion carrying weight far beyond the mechanical. Unexpected allies began to emerge. Rival shops, seeing the impossible challenge and the courage of the lone girl facing it, lent tools and expertise. Former Marines, connected through her father's reputation, offered quiet counsel and hands-on help. Men who had once measured loyalty by patch color now measured it by heart, by respect, by courage in the face of impossible odds. Raven realized that fixing this Harley wasn't just about mechanics. It was about rebuilding trust, mending fractures, and giving the men around her a chance to confront their own grief. The tension intensified as enemies closed in. Whispers of sabotage continued. Glances in darkened corners betrayed doubt, and the pressure of failure pressed like a physical weight on Raven's shoulders. Yet with every tightened bolt, every calibrated adjustment, she began to see the engine and the men surrounding her in a new light. This phase of the battle wasn't just about metal and fire. It was about hearts hardened by loss, about men who had refused help for too long, about grief trapped in a chrome and steel shell. Raven realized she wasn't only repairing the bike, she was repairing the men who had built it, the brotherhood that had been fractured by fear, and even the memory of a boy lost too soon. The responsibility was enormous, but she embraced it, every pulse of adrenaline and every aching muscle reminding her that courage was forged in the darkest, most impossible moments. By the time the sun broke across the horizon, Raven's hands were raw, her mind stretched thin, but a thread of momentum had formed. Every sabotage she discovered, every secret obstacle she overcame, had brought her closer to the impossible, not just a functioning engine, but a living memorial capable of carrying grief, honor, and redemption across the mountain roads once more. She understood, finally, that success meant more than mechanics. It meant confronting rage, earning trust, and proving that even the youngest, quietest outsider could hold the weight of an entire brotherhood in her hands. The garage was thick with tension, the air humming like the anticipation before a storm. Tools lay in careful order, every panel polished, every wire aligned. The rebuilt engine sat at the center, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights, a monument to nights of sweat, grief, and persistence. Men stood around silently, faces carved from shadow and skepticism. 55 mechanics had walked away. Now, all eyes were on Raven Cross, the 20-year-old who had refused to flinch when everyone else had failed. She crouched, hands steady despite the trembling in her arms, and performed the final ignition test. Sparks danced, the engine coughed and spluttered, then fell silent. The roar she had imagined, the affirmation of every long night, did not come. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she felt the weight of the impossible crush her. All the sabotage, all the grief, all the doubts of those around her, everything pressed down. For a heartbeat, she considered letting the Harley remain silent, letting the memories stay trapped in steel. But Raven drew in a deep breath, remembering her father's lessons and the quiet strength of the men who had lent her help. She traced each misaligned valve, recalibrated the fuel mix, tightened the smallest bolt, and corrected the oil passage she had once repaired. Every motion was deliberate. Deliberate as the beat of a drum, deliberate as the heartbeat of a man returning to life. She stepped back and tried again. This time, the engine roared. The sound was pure, low, and thunderous, echoing through the compound and spilling into the night. It was a voice that had waited decades to speak, a roar of grief, of memory, of triumph. Raven's eyes burned with tears. She didn't notice, her hands slick with oil, but steady as she adjusted the throttle and let the Harley breathe fully. Around her, the bikers exhaled, some openly in awe, some silently in disbelief. The impossible had been conquered. The memorial ride began, engines growling in unison, the Black Hills trembling under the weight of chrome and power. Raven led the pack, the very machine that had defeated 55 seasoned mechanics alive beneath her. The wind tore at her hair, the cold biting at exposed skin, and every twist of the mountain road demanded focus, precision, and courage. But she was ready. She had earned the respect of the men beside her, and even the most hardened eyes in the club now followed her lead. At the mountain where Eli Mercer had died, the procession slowed. Riders dismounted, circling the bike in reverence. Graves stood beside her, silent at first, fists clenched, scars stark against the fading light. For the first time, he confronted the grief he had carried for years. His voice, low and trembling, cut through the silence. Eli, this was never about vengeance. It was about remembrance. You ride with us now, son. He touched the Harley, fingers grazing the titanium capsules that had once imprisoned his son's memory, now carefully handled by Raven. In that moment, the curse lifted, not through fire, not through retribution, but through truth, humility, and courage. Justice had been delivered, not with violence, but with accountability and honor. The men of the Iron Serpents, the rival shops, the former Marines, even the quiet shadows that had watched over Raven, bore witness. The Harley, once a tomb for grief, had become a living tribute, its engine a heartbeat linking the past, present, and future. Raven felt the weight of the ride lift slightly from her shoulders. The impossible had been done. She had not only rebuilt the bike, but restored faith, honor, and brotherhood. Around her, the riders roared in acknowledgement, engines harmonizing into a symphony of respect. And for the first time, Grave allowed himself to exhale, to release the boy he had lost, and to honor him properly, not through destruction, but through remembrance, trust, and the courage to face truth. The Black Hills echoed with the roar of the Harley, a sound of triumph, sorrow, and redemption. Raven led the pack back down the winding roads, feeling the invisible weight of 55 failures, the scars of grief, and the resolve of courage lift with every turn. In that moment, the line between machine and memory, between loss and honor, between fear and courage, blurred. The ride had become a ritual of healing, a testament that impossible problems were rarely mechanical. They were human, and the heart, not the wrench, determined the outcome. The garage was quiet in the days after the memorial ride, the echoes of engines fading into memory, replaced by the hum of respect and reflection. The Harley, once a symbol of fear and impossibility, now sat gleaming under the South Dakota sun, a rolling memorial to every fallen brother. It had been freed from its curse, not by chance, but through courage, honesty, and relentless determination. Every scratch, every polished chrome panel, every bolt tightened by Raven's hands told a story of grief transformed into honor. The machine no longer threatened the men around it, it inspired them. Grave approached Raven the morning after the ride, his scarred face softened, though still etched with loss. "You've earned more than respect," he said, voice measured but sincere. "You've earned a place with us." A new shop was built inside the compound, specifically for her, a space of tools, steel, and quiet reverence for the work she had done. Raven had arrived as an outsider, carrying nothing but courage and precision, yet now she had the authority and trust of a brotherhood that once seemed impenetrable. She looked at the workshop, the walls lined with memories and promises, and realized she was no longer searching for belonging. She had earned it. The saboteur, previously hidden among the mechanics who had fled or failed, was revealed in a tense confrontation. It was Vic Lawson, a former friend and mechanic, whose grief over a lost brother had warped into destructive pride. Raven confronted him not with anger but with clarity. "Your grief doesn't have to destroy everything," she said quietly. "It can build instead." Vic, initially defiant, eventually accepted her guidance and Grave's condition: service over sabotage, contribution over vengeance. By the end, he had helped repair secondary bikes, supported memorial rides, and quietly earned back a measure of trust. His redemption became part of the broader healing, proof that courage and accountability could transform even the most destructive impulses. The club itself evolved. Men who once defined themselves by fear and toughness now carried a quiet strength, a humility tempered by loss and respect. There were fewer reckless rides, fewer impulsive confrontations. Brotherhood was no longer measured only in scars or threats, but in loyalty, honesty, and the willingness to confront grief openly. Grave, once closed and unyielding, became a leader who could balance rage with remembrance. Knuckles remained Raven's silent protector and confidant, the bond between them deeper and more resilient than ever before. Ash Doyle, the vice president, finally voiced what many had felt: admiration for courage and recognition that leadership came in many forms. Raven herself was transformed. She had come to the Iron Serpents with nothing but skill and a quiet code of honor, and she left having reshaped the lives of everyone around her. She moved through the compound with confidence, teaching younger mechanics, mentoring women who sought to follow her path, and quietly commanding respect without raising her voice. She had confronted fear, sabotage, grief, and doubt, and emerged not hardened or embittered, but tempered, her moral center sharpened by the trials she had endured. The rebuilt Harley, a now functional memorial, became the centerpiece of annual rides, each journey reminding the club and Raven alike that courage and humility could transform even the most impossible challenges. Men who had once doubted, fled, or walked away now followed her lead, understanding that legacy was built not on fear or domination, but on accountability, respect, and courage under pressure. In private moments, Raven thought of her family, her father, Mason, whose lessons had guided her hands, her mother, Lena, whose sacrifice had reminded her of the stakes, her younger brother, Noah, whose future depended on her courage. By facing impossible odds, she had honored their teachings and proven to herself that true belonging was earned, not given. By the end, Ravencross was no longer a rookie, no longer an outsider. She had transformed into a cornerstone of the Iron Serpents, a symbol of courage, honor, and the power of confronting impossible problems with integrity. The club had survived, evolved, and grown stronger. The bike roared under her hands, not as a curse, but as a heartbeat of remembrance and redemption. And Raven, finally at peace with herself and the men she had helped, knew that she had not only rebuilt a machine, but restored an entire brotherhood. Impossible problems are rarely mechanical. They are born from grief, pride, fear, and the weight of unresolved loss. The Harley that defeated 55 mechanics was not cursed by fate. It was cursed by the unresolved rage and sorrow of those who built it. Ravencross proved that skill alone cannot solve these kinds of problems. Courage without ego, humility, and moral clarity is what heals wounds left unseen. Brotherhood is not measured by scars, intimidation, or dominance. It is measured by accountability, respect, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The men of the Iron Serpents learned that honoring the dead does not mean trapping them in metal or controlling the living. It means carrying their memory responsibly, transforming grief into purpose, and allowing healing to follow. Raven's journey shows that courage is more than physical bravery. It is moral, emotional, and persistent. By choosing to face fear, accept help, and act with integrity, she healed not just an engine, but a brotherhood fractured by loss and pride. True legacy is built by lifting others, confronting the impossible, and acting with both heart and skill. 55 veteran mechanics walked away, unwilling to face what they could not control. One rookie stayed. One young mechanic, with nothing but skill, courage, and heart, changed everything. She rebuilt more than a bike. She restored a brotherhood, honored the dead, and proved that the impossible can be overcome. Before we close, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, who you would have stood beside, and the impossible challenge you're facing today. If this story inspired you, hit like, subscribe, and share. Remember, legends aren't born from strength alone. They're born from the choice to stay when everyone else walks away.